Well, that's Ghaleb Cachalia. Solly Malatsi is the national spokesperson for the Democratic Alliance. Solly, good afternoon to you. So Ghaleb Cachalia has resigned. Are you surprised?
Hi, Stephens. We aren't surprised. The letter came in sometime around midday today, and we have accepted his resignations. But I mean, it's very important to just go through the mischaracterizations that he has articulated in his letter, because it reflects a very skewed and inaccurate version of events that transpired. And I just want to deal first with his claims around the leadership being authoritarian. The reality of the matter, Stephens, is that the DA caucus had a very prolonged and robust discussion on the Middle East conflict on the 19th of October, where Mr. Cachalia and other colleagues in caucus had an opportunity to speak at great length in order to influence what would then become the party's position on the issue and the process that would ensue afterwards. What then happened, which was also extraordinary and given the magnitude of the issue, was that in the subsequent two caucus meetings, one on the 2nd of November and the following week, Mr. Cachalia was again, amongst other colleagues, given ample time to canvass their individual opinions on how we should best approach that issue. And those opinions did not prevail with the majority of caucus. So it is inaccurate to now claim that simply because he was unable to lobby or persuade the rest of caucus that his views should then inform, the ultimate position of the party is very self-serving. But secondly, the issue here is that we are a very diverse organization with individuals with very different views. And when those views don't prevail, it is not a reflection on the organization, but rather on the lack of quality, for instance, on the ideas that are being put forward by the individual. The other thing here is that, because he mixes a whole lot of issues, but they are all rooted around, he has centered his dissatisfaction around authoritarianism, which centers around basically not being able to persuade the rest of caucus to support his views on the matter. Is that in a caucus of our size, you are always going to have different individuals trying to influence policy to take a particular direction. There are colleagues who are still members of the DA who are in caucus today, whose views did not prevail in that caucus meeting. Okay. They did not aggressively go they did not aggressively go outside the party throwing their toys, saying that I wasn't allowed to speak on this issue. The reality is, if you are not the shadow spokesperson on a portfolio, you are not the communicator on that portfolio.
Okay, Solly, that's fine, and I accept that to an extent. But it's also true that you've basically issued, well, not you, your leader has issued an edict, an instruction, diktat, to use another word, that only he and only your foreign affairs spokesperson will talk about Gaza. I mean, are you even allowed to talk about Gaza as a spokesperson?
I am. And, Stephens, there is a very important principal issue here, is that once caucus has had an ample opportunity to speak on an issue and agree that this is the caucus position, in order to have uniform communication, it is not extraordinary to then remind the caucus that given the extensive debate we've had on the issue, now the time for having sideshows is over. We need to support the position of the caucus. It is not an extraordinary development in political organizations or even in other organizations that may not be political. The reality is, once the organization's position has been debated and has been agreed to, it is then the responsibility of everyone in that organization to support that position, because you cannot be a part-time member of your own organization simply because you've got different views on an issue that you, one, had an opportunity to influence but could not influence by getting everybody to agree to your side.
So Solly, the ANC MPs who voted to stop the parliamentary inquiry into Phala Phala were right because they were doing what the ANC told them to do, even if they believed Ramaphosa, the president, had a case to answer. That's what you're saying. If it's good for your members, it must be good for them.
The ANC members can speak for themselves. I speak for the Democratic Alliance, Stephen. But
Okay.
what I'm saying to you is that there is a process issue here. And the process is very important because in this case, Mr. Cachalia claims that he was gagged, which is untrue because he had an opportunity on more than 2 occasions, which were 3 caucus meetings, and in other forums where within the party where he tried to consistently advocate for his position. The maturity in politics is that even when you lose a debate, right, and the caucus or the organization that has agreed on the position which you are part of, you support that organization.
Okay.
Or if Mr. Cachalia has realized that he's unable to support it because his views do not prevail, he has made his choice. But it is important to then be truthful in depicting the accuracy of the events that transpired, because that is very important here.
Okay. Isn't the real reason that the Democratic Alliance has done this and has stopped people from talking about this is that you have people of the Muslim faith and people of the Jewish faith who vote and support you? Now, not everyone who's Muslim supports the Palestinians, not everyone who's Jewish supports Israel's actions, but that's really the reason, isn't it? You're worried about losing voters of the Muslim faith and voters of the Jewish faith. That's why you've done it.
No, that is not
Really?
correct. That assumption is not correct. The real issue here is that you cannot have an organization that is persistently having different voices, different views on an issue when we are trying to have one uniform message. Because you can't be debating policy in perpetuity. There has to come a time wherein post their debate that has been had, there's agreement on what the party position is. And in this case, and I reaffirm that, the DA is in favor of a 2-state solution. We are in favor of an unoccupied and sovereign Palestine. And it was important that in order not to muddy the party's message, we remind everyone in caucus that the party's shadow minister for international relations, as the appointed political principal, and that in that portfolio should lead communications on that. That is not extraordinary because the party shadow ministers are the lead communicators on their portfolios.
Okay.
Because you can't have an instance where every MP speaks on every other on every other portfolio, because that dilutes the party's position.
Solly, you said earlier you can talk about Gaza. Do Israel's actions in Gaza constitute a genocide?
Come again, Stephen?
You said earlier you are able to talk on Gaza on behalf of the Democratic Alliance. Do Israel's actions in Gaza constitute a genocide?
I heard you by the actions. Repeat that line because I need to hear you correctly.
Is what Israel is doing in Gaza, is that a genocide?
Or the developments in Israel, do those contribute to a genocide?
Is Israel guilty of genocide?
In Israel.
Sorry, I can't quite believe that the line's dropping now, but anyway, let me try again. On behalf of the Democratic Alliance, is Israel guilty of genocide in Gaza?
I mean, the DA's view with the developments in Israel at this stage is that we obviously do not support any form of violence. We do not support any attacks on civilians. It is important that the attacks that are perpetuated on civilians are stopped because they do not provide for the environment for a 2-state solution to take place. And that is why I did mention from the onset that we support a sovereign Palestine and an unoccupied Palestine.
Is Israel guilty of genocide?
We believe that in order for the conflict in the Middle East to not perpetuate to the extent that it is, that there is a 2-state solution that prevents any violent attacks on civilians. We do not support attacks on civilians. It is important that I re-emphasize that we support a free, sovereign, and unoccupied Palestine.
Sure. That's not what I asked, Solly. Is Israel guilty of genocide?
I'm restating the DA's position.
So the DA cannot answer the question, is Israel guilty of genocide? You can't answer it.
Stephen, we are in favor of a two-state solution. We are in favor of a sovereign Palestine, and the ongoing environment in that space do not, at this stage, are not conducive for peace to prevail at the current instant. And it is important, right, because this is not a gotcha moment, Stevens, no matter how, persistent you are. It's not.
So, sorry, I appreciate that, and I shouldn't even smile because the situation in Gaza is quite so serious. But there's a bigger political point here, which is that the majority of South Africans believe that what Israel is doing is a genocide. So do you then, as the DA, support our government's application at the International Court of Justice or not?
We've articulated our position on the government's approach to the ICJ, and I think, again, it is important to restate that we are not in support of the government's actions because, the government has chosen a side, and it is important in resolving the conflict or in any effort whatsoever to get to a solution on the conflict in the Middle East that we continue to promote the two-state solution, that we again call out any form of violence that continues to target civilians. And there's been, those efforts on both sides that targeting civilians or have resulted in civilian loss of life.
Solly Malatsi, we'll leave it there. Thank you. National spokesperson for the Democratic Alliance.